Darius was beginning to get used to the strange rhythm of his new life aboard the Ziran warship. The days felt long, and though he was no longer chained, he was still a prisoner. But something had shifted since his battle with General Vashera. She had spared him, taken him from the edge of death. And now, he wasn't sure if he was a prisoner or something else entirely. He hadn't seen much of her since their conversation, but he could feel her eyes watching him when they crossed paths. There was an unspoken tension hanging in the air, something he couldn't put his finger on. It had been 2 days since the battle. Vashera had left him mostly alone, but the Ziran soldiers were still uneasy. Some were wary, others openly hostile. Yet none dared to challenge General Vashera's orders. As he wandered through the ship's dark hallways, trying to ignore the stares from the other Ziran soldiers, Darius found himself deep in thought. Why had she spared him? General Vashera, the undefeated warrior who had crushed countless enemies without mercy. Why him? That question had been gnawing at him, and he couldn't seem to shake it. Suddenly, a loud alarm blared, pulling him out of his thoughts. The ship shuddered, and Darius quickly grabbed the nearest support rail to steady himself. The warning lights flashed red, and the Ziran soldiers began moving with military precision. Before he could even ask what was going on, the door to his quarters slid open, and Vashera stood there, her face hard and determined. "Get to the control room. We are under attack," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. Darius didn't argue. He had no choice. He followed her quickly down the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. As they entered the control room, the chaos inside was palpable. Ziran officers were shouting orders, trying to coordinate their defenses. Darius tried to get a sense of what was happening, but his mind was still spinning. Vashera stood in front of the large viewing screen, her eyes fixed on it. The enemy ships were closing in fast, their weapons primed for attack. Without a word, she turned to him. "I need your help." Darius blinked, surprised. "My help? What can I do?" She didn't look at him. "You are a strategist. You know how humans think. Help me anticipate their next move." Darius nodded, stepping closer to the control panel. He had no idea what kind of alien technology he was dealing with, but the basics were the same. Attack patterns, defense strategies. He could do this. As he worked, he could feel Vashera's eyes on him. She was quiet, focused, but there was something different in the way she looked at him now. Something more personal. The seconds ticked by as Darius worked, his mind whirling. General Vashera, the mighty warrior who had defeated him, now needed his help. She was still as fierce and unyielding as ever, but there was something else in her gaze, a vulnerability. For the first time, Darius realized that perhaps he wasn't the only one caught in a strange situation. The alarms stopped blaring, and the control room went silent. The enemy ships had retreated, at least for now. Darius exhaled, feeling a rush of relief. He had done it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment had shifted something between him and Vashera. When he turned to look at her, she was already gone, but her words echoed in his mind. "I need your help." Darius sat in the dimly lit holding chamber of the Ziran warship. The cold metal walls surrounded him, the air thick with the scent of alien machinery. His wrists were bound in energy restraints, but strangely, he was still alive. Why? He had been defeated. He had expected death, or at best, imprisonment in a labor camp. But instead, General Vashera had spared him. Outside the cell, the Ziran officers whispered among themselves. Darius couldn't understand their language, but their uneasy glances toward him told him one thing. They didn't agree with their leader's decision. The door slid open with a low hum. Vashera stepped inside, her golden eyes unreadable. She looked at him as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You are not like the others," she said finally. Darius scoffed. "Because I'd fought back." She shook her head. "No, because you did not fear death. Even when you lost, you looked at me like an equal. Most humans would beg. But you," she tilted her head, You amused me. Darius frowned. Amused you? Vashera smirked, crossing her arms. You fight with reckless determination, but your kind is not known for their strength. What makes humans so stubborn? Darius leaned back, staring at her. Because we don't like being told we're weak. Vashera's expression shifted slightly, as if she hadn't expected that answer. You confuse me, human, she admitted. Likewise, Darius shot back. A moment of silence passed between them. The tension was different now, not hostile, but curious. Outside, a Zyran officer stormed in. He was taller than Vashera, his red markings indicating a high rank. He didn't even glance at Darius before turning to his general. Vashera, he said in their tongue, his voice sharp. The warlords demand an explanation. Why is the human still alive? Vashera's jaw tightened. He is my prisoner. He should be dead. The officer growled. Spare one, and soon they will think we are weak. Darius watched closely. Vashera's fingers twitched near her blade, but she did not strike. Instead, she stared down her officer with quiet authority. I will decide his fate, she said coldly. The officer clenched his fists, then stormed out without another word. Darius exhaled. Seems like I'm causing trouble for you. Vashera turned back to him, her eyes still unreadable. Perhaps. For the first time, Darius noticed something in her gaze. Hesitation. Why had she spared him? He wasn't sure, but something told him Vashera herself didn't fully understand her own reasons. Whatever it was, it made one thing clear. She didn't see him as just a prisoner. She saw him as something else. The warship had fallen silent in the hours following the attack. The enemy ships had retreated, but tension still lingered in the air. The crew was busy with repairs and monitoring the ship's systems, but for Darius, everything felt different. He had always been a soldier. Fight, survive, and move on. But now, it was as if the rules had changed. And General Vashera, the woman who had defeated him, had become a constant presence in his thoughts. Days passed, and Darius found himself increasingly unable to ignore the quiet tension between them. He still didn't fully understand why she spared him, why she had called on his help during the attack. There was no clear explanation, but there was something undeniable in the way she looked at him. It wasn't the cold, calculating gaze of a conqueror. It was something else, something more complicated. One evening, as he was walking through the ship's corridors, he ran into her. Vashera stood by the observation window, looking out into the vastness of space. Her figure was illuminated by the soft blue light of the stars. She didn't hear him approach. "General," he said, his voice breaking the stillness. She turned, her golden eyes locking onto his. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You helped save my ship." Darius shrugged, trying to hide the weight of his emotions. "I did what I had to." She took a step toward him, her gaze never leaving his. "But you didn't have to. You could have let us fall. But you didn't." Darius opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He was suddenly aware of how close she was. The air between them felt heavy, charged. He had been fighting for survival his entire life. He had always kept his emotions in check. But with Vashera, something was different. "I don't know why I spared you," she said quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "You're my prisoner." But her voice trailed off, and she took a breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I don't understand why you keep challenging me." Darius frowned, his heart beating a little faster. "You mean, you want me to bow down? Because that's not going to happen." Vashera's lips twitched into a faint smile. "No, human. I don't want you to bow down. But I don't understand you." Darius leaned against the wall, folding his arms. "I don't understand you either, General." There was a long pause, and for the first time, Darius saw the uncertainty in her eyes. She was a warrior, a conqueror, yet here she was, conflicted. "Maybe we should stop pretending," Darius said, his voice low. Stop pretending you're my captor and I'm your prisoner. Vashera's gaze softened. For a brief moment, he thought she might say something. Anything. But instead, she stepped back. I'll never stop being your commander, human, she said, her voice steady once again. But perhaps we can figure out what comes next. Darius watched her leave, his heart still racing. Something was happening between them, something that neither of them had anticipated. But it was clear. The line between enemy and ally was beginning to blur. And that scared them both. The Zyran warship had never felt so heavy. Darius moved through the corridors, the quiet hum of the engines the only sound around him. It had been days since the attack, but a strange unease lingered. General Vashera's actions had stirred something within him, something he hadn't expected. There was an unspoken bond forming between them, something deeper than either of them were willing to admit. But that wasn't the only problem. Darius had started to notice whispers among the Zyran soldiers. The Zyran Empire was a warrior culture, and any sign of weakness was not tolerated. It wasn't just his presence on the ship that caused tension. It was the way General Vashera had treated him, spared him, protected him. And now, the consequences were starting to show. The door to Darius's quarters slid open with a loud hiss. He turned, his hand instinctively moving to the blaster he'd been given. But it wasn't an enemy that walked in. It was Vashera. Her golden eyes were cold, but there was something more in her expression, a flicker of tension that had never been there before. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Darius, she said, her voice lower than usual. We have a problem. He didn't like the sound of that. What's going on? She looked away for a moment, her jaw tightening. Fear, uncertainty. He hadn't seen those emotions in her before. The War Council has ordered a new course of action, she said, her eyes flicking back to him. And it involves you. Darius's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? What have they planned? Her gaze hardened. The warlords have decided that you're too dangerous to be left alive. Darius stood still, his mind racing. What? They want you executed, Vashera said, her voice flat. It's not just because of what happened during the attack. It's because you're becoming a symbol of something they cannot control. The words hit Darius like a punch to the gut. He had known the Zyrans were merciless, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to be caught in the middle of their political games. You said you wouldn't let them kill me, he said, his voice trembling with anger. What happened to that? Vashera didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I want to protect you, Darius, but I can't fight all of them. Then help me escape, Darius said, his eyes blazing. We can leave together. Vashera's face hardened. She turned her back to him, pacing a few steps. You don't understand. The War Council has made its decision. If I defy them, I will lose everything. My position, my command. Darius's fists clenched. So you'll just let them kill me? Her head snapped back to him, her golden eyes filled with something he had never seen before. Regret. I'm sorry, she whispered, but I have no choice. The door opened with a sharp hiss, and 2 Zyran officers stepped inside. Vashera didn't move, her face a mask of cold determination. You've made your decision, General, one of them said, his voice dripping with authority. The human must die. Darius's heart sank, and for a moment, he wondered if he had misjudged her. The silence in the control room was deafening. Darius stood beside General Vashera, their hands on the ship's controls, feeling the weight of the moment. The broadcast had gone out. Now, it was only a matter of time before the Zyran warlords would respond. They had declared war on her, and Darius knew that a reckoning was coming. Vashera's eyes were fixed on the monitors, calculating their next move. Her face was calm, but Darius could see the tension in her shoulders. She was a warrior, but now she had become something more. She was a rebel leader, fighting not just for her people, but for what was right. We have to hold this position, she said, her voice steady. but there was an urgency in it that Darius hadn't heard before. Once the fleet receives the broadcast, we'll have only a few moments before they try to retaliate. The rest of the warlords won't sit back quietly. Darius nodded, the weight of their situation sinking in. He had fought in many battles, but this one felt different. There was something personal about it now. It wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for freedom, for a future where they could choose their own destiny. "I'll help you hold the line," Darius said, his voice unwavering. Vashera turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his with something that made his heart race. There was gratitude, but also something deeper. He couldn't place it. "I didn't expect you to help," she admitted, her voice low, almost like she was saying it more to herself than to him. "But I'm glad you are." The sound of footsteps approaching snapped them both out of their thoughts. The doors to the control room slid open, and several Ziran soldiers stepped in, weapons raised. They had come to take back control. Vashera's expression hardened. She didn't hesitate. In a single movement, she drew her blade and pointed it at the soldiers. "You've made a mistake," she said, her voice calm but with an edge of authority that made the soldiers hesitate. Darius felt the tension in the air as the soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. They had been trained to follow orders, but they had never been faced with a general who defied the very foundation of their empire. "Step aside," one of the soldiers growled. "You're out of line, General." Darius stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You don't understand. This is over. The warlords have lost their power." For a moment, it seemed like the soldiers might back down. But then, with a shout, they lunged at Darius and Vashera, determined to stop them. Vashera was quick, too quick for them to react. She took down the first soldier with a swift movement, disarming him before he even had time to react. Darius followed suit, his human agility helping him avoid the soldiers' strikes as he fought back. The battle was fast and intense. The Zirans were strong, but Darius and Vashera were a force unlike anything they had faced before. They fought side by side, each strike a testament to their bond. They weren't just surviving. They were defying their fates. Finally, the remaining soldiers, realizing they were outmatched, retreated. The control room fell silent again. Vashera turned to Darius, her eyes filled with a mixture of respect and something else, something deeper. "We've won this battle," she said, "but the real fight is just beginning." Darius looked at her, his heart pounding. He wasn't just fighting alongside her. He was fighting for her, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he was fighting for something that truly mattered. The war wasn't over, but the fight for a better future had just begun. Together, they would face whatever came next. Darius stood in the cold, dimly lit room, his heart pounding in his chest. The Ziran officers who had entered were still standing there, their eyes cold and unblinking. His gaze shifted to General Vashera, whose once confident and strong presence now seemed uncertain. She had betrayed him, or at least it seemed that way. She had agreed to let him be executed, to follow the orders of the War Council without question. And now, the final moment was approaching. But something inside Darius told him it wasn't over yet. There had to be a way out. He didn't move as the officers approached. Vashera stood behind them, watching him closely. Her face was unreadable, but he could see the tension in her posture. She wasn't ready to do this. "General, are you going to let us carry out the execution?" one of the officers asked, his voice demanding. Vashera hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice barely audible. "I don't have a choice." Darius clenched his fists. This wasn't the woman he had seen fight. This wasn't the General Vashera who had spared his life, who had trusted him. "I don't believe you," Darius said, his voice steady but full of defiance. "You think this is the only way." Her golden eyes met his, but she didn't speak at first. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the low hum of the ship's engines. Then, slowly, Vashera stepped forward. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "If I defy the council now, they will destroy everything I've worked for. They will destroy all of us. Darius took a step toward her. So you'll let them kill me instead? That's how far you've fallen. She flinched, and for a moment, Darius saw the conflicted expression in her eyes. She wasn't as certain as she had appeared. I never wanted this, she said, her voice shaking. But I have no choice. I made a vow to protect my people, to follow the orders of the council. I can't break it now. Darius shook his head. That's not who you are, Vashera. I've seen you fight for what's right. You didn't spare my life to let them kill me. Her eyes flickered, and in that moment, he could see it. The doubt, the fear, the desire to do the right thing. Maybe you're right, she whispered. Maybe I don't have to follow their orders. Maybe I can do something different. Darius took another step closer. Then let me help you. We can leave together. We can escape and find a way to change things, together. Her gaze softened, and for a moment, it seemed as though she would agree. But the harsh voice of one of the officers cut through the tension. General, what is your decision? The officer demanded. The human must be eliminated. Now. Vashera looked at him, then at Darius. She took a deep breath, and for the first time, made her choice. No, her voice rang out, clear and commanding. I will not kill them. The officers stared at her in shock. For the first time, Vashera was defying the council, defying the empire she had served all her life. Darius could hardly believe it. What happens now? She turned to him, her expression resolute. Now we fight. We fight for what's right. Darius couldn't help but smile. There was hope now, a new path ahead. They had chosen each other, and now they would face the future together. Darius sat in his cold metal cell, his mind racing. The Zyran warship moved smoothly through space, but inside his prison, time felt frozen. He had expected torture, interrogation, anything but this strange silence. Why was he still alive? And more importantly, why had Vashera spared him? The door hissed open, and she entered. General Vashera. She walked with calm confidence, her golden eyes locked onto him. Her armor gleamed under the dim blue lights, making her look more like a queen than a warrior. She stepped closer, tilting her head slightly. You have been quiet, human. Darius smirked. Did you expect me to beg? She studied him for a moment before shaking her head. No, you are different. He raised an eyebrow. You keep saying that. She crouched down to his level, her piercing gaze never leaving his. I have fought many humans. They all feared us. But you refused to kneel, even in defeat. Darius exhaled slowly. Maybe because I don't think you're as scary as you act. A flicker of amusement crossed her face, but it disappeared just as quickly. Tell me, Darius Kane, she said, speaking his name for the first time. What makes humans so relentless? He frowned. What do you mean? She leaned slightly closer. I have seen your kind fight until their bodies break. Even when there is no hope, even when death is certain, you still resist. Why? Darius chuckled. Because we don't like losing. Vashera's lips curled into the smallest hint of a smile. That much is clear, she murmured. She stood up and began pacing. Darius noticed something strange. She was thinking. Really thinking. Your people call us invaders, she said after a moment. But we see ourselves as conquerors. To us, strength is everything. The weak serve the strong. Darius narrowed his eyes. Is that why you spared me? Because you think I'm strong. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. Perhaps. For the first time, Vashera seemed unsure of something. Darius smirked. I think you're starting to like me. Vashera stiffened, her golden eyes narrowing. Do not flatter yourself, human. He grinned. Too late. She sighed, crossing her arms. You are impossible. That's what makes us human. Another silence stretched between them. But this time, it felt different. Not like captor and prisoner. not like enemies. Something was changing. Vashera took one last look at him before stepping toward the door. "Rest, human," she said. "You will need your strength." Darius watched her go, his curiosity growing. What was she planning? And more importantly, why did she look at him like that? The battlefield was a wasteland of metal and fire. The war between humans and the Ziran Empire had raged for years, and now on this desolate moon, another fight was about to be decided. Commander Darius Kane stood alone, his armor dented, his breath heavy. Across from him, the towering alien warrior General Vashera watched him with sharp golden eyes. She was known as the Stormblade, undefeated in single combat. Her people believed humans were weak, unworthy of being warriors. Darius clenched his fists. His squad had fallen. He was the last one left. And Vashera, she was here to finish what they started. "You fight well, human," Vashera said, her voice a mix of amusement and challenge. "But this is where it ends." Darius tightened his grip on his plasma sword. "We'll see about that." Vashera moved first. She was fast, too fast. Her blade sliced through the air, forcing Darius to dodge. He barely managed to block her next attack, but the impact sent him skidding backward. She was stronger, faster, more experienced. But Darius was human, and humans never gave up. He adjusted his stance, watching her movements carefully. When she attacked again, he sidestepped at the last second and countered. His blade grazed her armor, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Vashera paused, surprised. No human had ever touched her in battle before. "Interesting," she murmured. Then, with blinding speed, she attacked again. Darius fought with everything he had. Sweat dripped down his face, his muscles burned, but he refused to fall. Blow after blow, he defended, countered, and struck back. He had never fought an opponent like her before, but he was running out of strength. Vashera, however, showed no signs of slowing down. She was toying with him, testing him. And then, in one swift motion, she knocked his sword away. Darius fell to one knee, panting. The tip of her blade hovered near his throat. It was over. "Go on," he muttered. "Do it." Vashera didn't move. She studied him, as if searching for something. "You should be dead," she said. "Yet you still glare at me. Why?" Darius smirked. "Because I don't fear you." For a long moment, Vashera was silent. Then, to everyone's shock, she lowered her weapon. "Capture him," she ordered her soldiers. The Ziran warriors hesitated. "General." "I said capture him," Vashera repeated. "No harm is to come to this one." Darius stared at her, confused. This wasn't how battles ended. He should be dead, or a prisoner of war. But instead, Vashera turned away, her golden eyes lingering on him for just a moment longer. Why had she spared him? Darius had no idea, but something told him his fight with Vashera was far from over. The Ziran warship was in chaos. The enemy forces were closing in, but the control room remained secure, thanks to Darius and Vashera's quick thinking. They had fought off the first wave of attackers, but the true battle was still ahead. The warlords wouldn't simply accept defeat. They would retaliate, and their forces were vast. Darius stood beside Vashera, staring at the monitors in front of them. The screens displayed multiple enemy ships closing in fast, and Darius could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We don't have much time," Vashera said, her voice calm but filled with determination. She had always been a warrior, but now she was something more, a leader of a rebellion. "We have to make them listen. We have to show them that the war is over." Darius nodded, his eyes focused on the approaching ships. "So, what's the plan?" Vashera looked at him, her golden eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "We fight, but we do it differently. We don't just stand our ground. We take control of this ship and send a message. We need to rally the crew and show them we're serious." Darius's heart raced. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about changing everything, about ending a war that had cost so much, about starting a new future, one where the Ziran Empire could become something better. He met her gaze, feeling a strong connection between them, a bond that had been forged in the heat of battle. He had been fighting to stay alive. Now he was fighting for something greater. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady. Together, they moved out of the control room, making their way through the darkened hallways of the ship. The crew had scattered after the last fight, but many had witnessed Vashera's defiance, and some were already starting to question their loyalty to the warlords. As they entered the main deck, the crew members turned, surprise and uncertainty in their eyes. Darius could feel the tension in the air. These soldiers had fought for the Ziran Empire their whole lives, and now they were facing a choice. Vashera stepped forward, her voice firm and commanding. "Listen to me," she said, her gaze sweeping over the gathered crew. "The warlords have failed us. We've been fighting for a cause that isn't ours. I've seen the destruction they've caused, and I won't stand by while innocent lives are lost. We can be better than this." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, one by one, the crew members began to lower their weapons, their expressions softening. Darius could see the change in their eyes. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were people, ready to fight for a new cause. "We're with you, General," one of the officers said, his voice filled with conviction. Darius watched as more crew members stepped forward, standing beside Vashera. It was happening. The rebellion was gaining momentum. They were taking back control of their future. Vashera turned to Darius, a faint smile on her face. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something better." He nodded, feeling a rush of hope fill him. This was just the beginning. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a new beginning, one that would change the course of history. Together, they would lead the way. As they moved forward, united in purpose, Darius realized something. He wasn't just following Vashera anymore. He was walking beside her, in this fight for a better future. And whatever came next, they would face it, together. The decision had been made. General Vashera had defied the War Council, and in that moment, everything had changed. Darius stood beside her, his heart racing, his thoughts wild. They were no longer enemies. They were allies. But now, they faced a much bigger challenge. The Ziran war machine was coming for them. As the ship shook from the tremors of an incoming attack, Vashera turned to Darius, her golden eyes filled with purpose. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice steady. "We have to get to the bridge and take control of the ship. If we can seize it, we can stop the warlords' plans and end this." Darius nodded, his mind already running through strategies. He had no experience with Ziran technology, but he knew how to think under pressure. And right now, that was all that mattered. The hulls of the warship were in chaos. Ziran soldiers scrambled to their posts, and the alarms were blaring. It was clear that the War Council had already sent out orders to track them down and finish what they had started. But Darius and Vashera weren't about to let that happen. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. As they reached the control center, Darius saw the intensity in Vashera's eyes. She had always been a warrior, a leader. But now, she was something more. She was a woman fighting for her beliefs, fighting for a future she had never thought possible. They reached the bridge, where a group of Ziran officers were trying to coordinate a defense. They turned to face Darius and Vashera, their eyes wide with surprise. "You," one of them shouted, "you dare defy the council." Vashera stepped forward, her posture commanding. "I defy anyone who stands in the way of what is right. The council has no power over me anymore." The officers hesitated, unsure of what to do, but Darius saw their fear. They knew General Vashera was not someone to be trifled with. She had been their leader for a reason, and now she had made it clear she wasn't going to let them control her. Without warning, the tension broke. The first officer lunged at them, but Vashera reacted in a flash, disarming him with a swift strike. Darius moved quickly to help, using his human agility to take down another officer. They were a perfect team, their movements synchronized as if they had fought together for years. The remaining officers backed away, their weapons raised, but it was clear they were outmatched. Vashera and Darius had the element of surprise, and they had something more powerful: determination. "We need to finish this," Darius said, his voice low but filled with resolve. Vashera nodded. "We don't have much time." They moved forward, taking control of the ship's systems. Darius quickly accessed the communication system, sending out a broadcast that would reach the entire fleet. "This is General Vashera," her voice boomed through the speakers. "I no longer serve the War Council. I will not stand by and watch innocent lives be destroyed. The Ziran Empire has lost its way, and it ends now." Darius watched as Vashera took a deep breath, the weight of her decision settling in. There was no turning back now. They had made their stand, and it was up to the rest of the galaxy to decide what came next. "Join me," Vashera continued. "Help me make a better future for all of us." The broadcast echoed across the ship, and for the first time in a long while, Darius felt a spark of hope. They were fighting for something more than just survival. They were fighting for change. The warship was no longer a prison. It was the start of something new. And as Darius looked at Vashera, he knew one thing: they would win.